When it comes to playing fighting games, there's two really important concepts. There's the robotic part, and then there's like the human part of playing the game. There's aspects of fighting that require robotic things that you don't need to think about, and human things, like things that require thinking, feeling, and such in order to, you know, do them properly. So, like, if you think about your habits as a person, when you go through your everyday life, whether you're like walking down the street, breathing, talking to people, you have habits, unconscious ones, that help you manage through various life situations. Like, for example, if you walk down the street, you probably have a certain way of walking. Your voice has a certain pitch. When you interact with your family or your friends, you're going to have certain habits, and these are things that you don't think about. They happen automatically, you know, through constant repetition, and your brain makes it easier for you to do them because you've made them subliminal habits. So this is something that can be used against you, you know, when you have bad habits and, you know, you struggle to break them, or you can use it to your advantage in order to make certain actions easier so you don't have to think about them. And that's what I would say is the robotic part of us, you know, as people. So how does that relate to fighting games? How can you use your robotic element, your unconscious habits to your advantage? Well, in many fighting games, there are moves that have a tendency to be, let's say, minus on block. Given an example, there's Birdie's forward fierce punch. It's -8 on block, but that means that no matter what, if Birdie does this forward fierce and I block it, that's free damage. So what I can do is I can go here in practice mode and I can practice punishing this over and over. Until, say, I get it, like, I don't know, 20 times in a row, 10 times in a row, without dropping. Let me turn off stuff. When you can get to that point that whenever this move is seen by you and you block it and you punish it, it's become that sort of robotic habit. It's a subliminal habit that you don't have to think about anymore, about how do I punish this, or like, even you won't even have to really think about punishing it. You'll see this, you'll block, and your body will go, oh, I blocked that move that I know is minus, let me punish it. You won't have to really process it. So, like, for example, if you're fighting Birdie or something, or some other character, he starts doing backdashes, or he starts walking back and forward, stuff like that. You have to think about those things to some degree, right? Because you're not 100% sure of what the situation allows. But you don't have to think about this. That's what I think about as the robotic element. Like, that's what you can use to your advantage. It's really important, in my opinion, to learn all of these things that are punishable for all the characters in the game. So, say, I know crouch sweep for Birdie is punishable, but not at every range. So what it might be important for me to do is to say, okay, set guard recovery to this. So I know that at this distance I can punish it, but at this distance I cannot. So I have to train my visual memory to know, can I punish this from here? Right, from there I can punish it, but from that other distance I cannot. So as long as I know where I can actually punish this move from, see, I can't punish it from there, right? If I train that knowledge, then I can visually, I can make it like I said before, like a unthinking thing, where I start to punish things automatically. This is something that you can only get with constant practice. For me, I spend a lot of time working on these kinds of punishes just because I want to make sure I internalize them, so that when they happen in a match, like if I'm fighting an opponent and they make a mistake, I know, like, I don't have to think about how to punish it or if I'm tense or all the rest of those things. I would rather my automatic reflexes take over for me, instead of trying to waste time trying to figure out, waste brain power, essentially, trying to punish this a certain kind of way. The other robotic element naturally is execution, how to do combos and such. You also want to kind of practice these things until they become second nature. That one is pretty self-explanatory. You can mostly learn this stuff by finding out what combos with your character and spending time to practice those things. And the more you practice that sort of thing, the less you have to spend time thinking about what combo to do in a match. And in some way, I sort of feel like footsies can be a robotic element, especially in this game, because it's very easy to practice it. Practice the spacing between the characters, normals, and such like that. Like, I could have Birdie throw out this kick, and then I could have Birdie throw out this punch. I could have Birdie throw out that roundhouse, and based on the distance, I can know what the actual ranges of Birdie's moves are. So from here, it seems like I should be able to miss against pretty much everything, right? That's the fierce. Well, that's hard to punish. Why is it so hard to punish? It goes right through his hands. His hands is not there no more. See, that's good to know. I actually didn't know this. But this is the sort of practice that you can do. But his hands are not there. His hands are not there at all. You can only hit his middle body. And even that is hard. So, for this sort of thing, that's probably the best option. Wow, I did not know that. But like, yeah, this is the sort of, robotic element thing that you can think about. You're going to sit down and say, okay, I'll make the computer do this and then block. And then they'll whiff the move, and then I say, okay, what can I actually punish this with? Can I punish this at every distance? If I hold it, what happens? Nothing. He doesn't get punished. What if I dash? Can I reach? Nope. And also, this helps teach you what the ranges are. And it's useful as a robotic element because you won't have to think about, you shouldn't have to think about how to punish it if you can punish it. So here's a real question. If he does fierce and it misses, can he do like jab afterwards? That's his real jab. He totally can punish you for that. That's crazy. Oh, but that's interesting. If I didn't punish the fierce. If you do it right on time, you can punish the follow-up. That's pretty good. Because this will miss sometimes, unless you're like right on time. So like if I'm playing footsies, that can work. And then I can occasionally do this one as a counter hit. But anyway, footsies, or rather, not footsies, that's wrong. The robotic element would be understanding the ranges of normals and what you can punish a whiff normal with. So you don't have to think about what to whiff a normal with if you practice. Though it would be good if you know that you want to whiff punish something and you see it happen and you can react on the fly to a number of normals. But if those sorts of things, if you're going for a whiff punish specifically, don't need to be thought about too deeply, because they're very static. They're very static things in the game, meaning that they don't change. Like if I play it today or play it tomorrow, whiff punish it normal, is the options that I can whiff punish it with are not going to change unless the game gets patched. Another thing that's a robotic element that you should know is so let's say I have an opponent in the corner, right? And I go to throw them again, and then they jump. One thing I can practice for sure is that. That's robotic. I shouldn't have to think about this too much. Right? Because them jumping is not gonna really change. As long as I do my let me see, guard off. As long as I do my throw loops properly, I'll throw loop them over and over, and then if they jump, then I punish it. Right? You should practice those kinds of things so you don't have to think about them as much. So that when the person jumps, so that when, like, after you do this and you go to throw and the person jumps, you're not like, oh shit, and you're like, what do I do? And then he comes down with a jump in and fucks you up, and then he gets the round. Or if you wanna, and then when you wanna expand your practice, you make the person instead jump forward. So you get a knockdown, and then you change what you do based on that. Oops. That's what I mean. So you would practice those kinds of things until you don't really have to think about them as much. But you should also try to practice not just the one option, but practice the other options that you could potentially use that would work in that situation as well. Although, like, Street Fighter V, I think, has a shit ton of problems, I really think I like their training mode. It's pretty good. It's not the best I've seen. I think the best I've seen belongs to Skullgirls. That game's training mode is kind of ridiculous. For me, I like to do stuff like that. You can get creative, but the key is and you want to practice all of these like 20 times in a row. Like, I use Bruce Lee quotes a lot, but like Bruce Lee says, I'm not afraid of a man who's practiced 1,000 kicks once. I'm afraid of a man who practiced one kick 1,000 times. And that's essentially it. You want to practice that robotic element until you can act. You want to practice those things that you don't have to think about them. Like certain things, like if I jump from here, like if I jump forward from here, I know that I'll cross up. And if I jump from here, I won't cross up. Stuff like that. knowing the timing of how to make a jump meaty. Those are very, very robotic things that you shouldn't have to think about, like how do I make this meaty. And you can practice those on your own time. Now the human element in a fighting game would be like, let's say you're fighting an opponent, and let's say you're fighting, like, I don't know, Balrog. I'll switch for Balrog. One thing I missed to say earlier was the point in practicing the robotic element of things is so that you can save your brain power to process the human element of things better. So the less time I have to spend thinking about how to do a combo is the more time I can spend analyzing my opponent's patterns, my opponent's game plan, my opponent's general thought process. Just to give an example of that sort of analysis, this I'm fighting Balrog, he's doing footsie stuff, and randomly I noticed that he'll do a jump back, and you might actually see this a lot in matches. He'll do a jump back, and he'll always do EX dash punch when he has meter. No matter what, as long as I'm in range to jump back, and he'll do this. There's not that much thinking involved. It's just his habit. Like, he has a habit of every time he jumps back, he does EX dash punch. So maybe I realize this. Maybe as I'm fighting, I realize this and I pay attention to it. And I'm like, oh hey, if he does EX dash punch every single time that he jumps back, I can actually just wait and then counter it. I don't have to get too crazy, but I can save my brain power for punishing this human element. Now naturally I could practice this, but I think understanding your normals through your robotic, like I said, your robotic practice, understanding your normals and their spacing, their timing and stuff like that, will make it really easy for you to pick the right option for the situation. But like I said, if I notice that every time he jumps back he does the EX dash punch, there are like a crap ton of options that I can use. Oops. Like there are a lot of things that I can do. And also, going into practice mode to try to understand the normals that you want to counter will also help. Or let's say his habit is not based on him, but it's actually based on me. Every once in a while I'll throw in a neutral jump just to try to hit any dash punches, and he notices that, right? Let's say he's smart and he says, oh, I noticed this guy likes to do neutral jump randomly, right? So I, as a Balrog player, will wait until he lands and then I'll dash punch. And then I notice that I go, oh, okay, well, every time I do a neutral jump he reacts, he waits, and then he does his own dash punch after the fact. He's waiting for me to dash punch, for me to neutral jump, right? So that gives me an opportunity. I can, dance around and not neutral jump and then jump at him, because he'll be so focused on this he won't notice this, because he's already thinking of waiting for me to land or waiting for me to get close to landing, and then he does it. Or maybe his dash punch habit is just a habit of reacting to every neutral jump with a dash punch just because. I can space out my jump a little more, and when he does it, counter it, just like I countered the EX dash punch from before. And when you use those kinds of, those are what I would say are like the human elements. They're the thinking parts. They're the elements that say, whenever my opponent gets up, he wakes up with a jab. Or every time my opponent gets up, he blocks. He blocks low. He jumps back. He does this. Is he doing anything? Is he waiting? Those are the human elements that you can get you can practice against how to counter them in practice mode, but you have to use your human brain to think about when do I use this action. So let's say, let's use this one. Let's say I'm fighting a person who has a tendency to get crazy, like on Wake Up, and I'm pressuring, and then know that he just got super meter, he doesn't have V trigger, and I hit him with a throw, he's about to die. This Wake Up super is actually decently likely. So if I have the health, I can just block it, and punish it properly. That was not a proper punish. Whatever. So essentially, I can use the human element to understand what it is that he wants to do and make the appropriate choice based on what's going on. But of course, it's not always going to be correct. Like, your choices are not always going to be right. But the more you practice the robotic element, which is punishing moves, which gives you free damage, and your setups is also afterwards are also like the robotic element. Like, if you get a setup every time after you do a situation, practice that till it becomes second nature. You don't have to think about it. But if you know that the less that you have to think about, the better. The less extraneous things that you have to think about, the better. But you should always be thinking. I know Street Fighter V is not a very thinking game, where the more you go ham, the better it is for you. But I still think you should think as you play, because it helps you. It helps you a lot. And try to save the not thinking for things that aren't really that important.